Good morning, good morning, good morning again. Another wonderful and glorious day. Actually, right before I pressed record on that, I could hear the birds chirping outside. Tweet, 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 tweet. It's kind of your stereotypical morning. You know, the birds are chirping, the sun is shining. I don't know if the sun is shining because our shutters are closed, but the sun is always shining. That's an interesting point. You know, the sun doesn't actually have to come out. It doesn't even need to rise. The sun is always risen. He rose. Speaking of the Son of God, he rose. He's already risen. We don't need him to rise again. We don't need him to come out again. There are obstructions that try to get in the way, but the sun is up. He's alive and well, and he's shining bright today. Amen. Pardon me. So I want to jump back into faith again. In Hebrews chapter 11 and verse 1, I'm going to start with verse 1 again. It says, "Now faith is the substance of things hoped for, the evidence of things not seen. For by it the men of old," or men in yesteryear, the men in the old scriptures, the men before us, those who have preceded us, obtained a good report. By faith they obtained a good report. So what's the implication? By faith the men and women of new can obtain a good report as well, right? Through faith we obtain a good report. Let's jump down to verse 4. It says, "By faith Abel offered to God a more excellent sacrifice than Cain offered." Now, if we jump way back, I didn't even mark this spot, but Cain and Abel in Genesis, was it chapter 4? It says, Abel, so it says in verse 3, it says, "In the course of time, Cain brought an offering to the Lord of the fruit of the ground." That's how this modern English version says, "in the course of time." Other translations say, "at the end of days," meaning it was at the end of the harvest or eventually or later on. You know, if you're someone who tills the fruit of the ground or crops, you've got different harvests, and sometimes things can produce really good stuff over and over and over again. But there's also like the stragglers, we'll say, the straggler harvest. There's stuff at the end that you could pluck and you could pick out what's left over and present that, right? It says in the course of time, Cain brought an offering to the Lord of the fruit of the ground. So Cain brought something that interpretively or arguably was his leftovers. He said, "I think I need to bring something to look good. I'm really embellishing here. So I'm going to scrounge up what's left over at the end of me eating what was good, and I'm going to say, 'Hey, Lord, you don't need anything. Here's my offering.'" That's not an offering of faith. The offering of faith is expectation of good from the Lord, right? This was an offering of fulfilling a technical requirement. But then it says Abel also brought, what did he bring? The firstborn of his flock and of their fat portions. He took the first and he took the fat portions. When I was growing up, you know, we were stuck in the fat is bad teaching, which is wrong. The fat is bad entirely. Obviously, you don't just sit here and eat, you know, whatever fat, but when I would read those things, I'd think the fat portion's disgusting. Fat, gross. No, the fat was the good stuff. When people said the fat out of some meaty thing, they were saying, "Oh, that's the good part. You know, that's where all the flavor comes from. That's where the yumminess is." Well, he brought the firstborn of his flock. He doesn't say just of the firstborn of his flock, or a portion of his flock, or some critter that he found. As one minister put it, he brought Fluffy. You know, it was such a good part of his crop, or his flock, excuse me, that he had a name for it. He had an endearing name. He brought the best, the first and the best. So it says in Hebrews 11:4, "By faith Abel offered to God a more excelling sacrifice than Cain offered." It excelled because he had faith in it. He knew, if I'm going to give God my best, God will always supply my need. And then it says, through this he was approved as righteous, with God testifying concerning his gifts. So now Abel has obtained a good report because God testified of his gift. And then he says he still speaks through his faith, though he is dead. That faith carried on through the grave. You know, Abel was killed by Cain. It doesn't say, oh, well, Abel must have done something wrong because he died, or he didn't have enough faith to stay alive. No, it says he had faith, and his faith is still speaking. Even though he died, even though circumstances were different, you know, God wasn't controlling everything that could possibly happen in his existence. There were other circumstances going on, but he was pleasing God through his faith. In fact, it's still testifying. This is how many years? Like 6,000 years later or something. We're still talking about how Abel pleased the Father. And I think every time we talk about this, God remembers. He remembers that offering of faith. It's like that sweet smelling, you know, when you take that old garment that just never stops smelling good. Every time you wash it, you pull it out, you go, oh, that smells good, you know, like some old cotton, real good quality cotton or linen or something. Every time you talk about it, God's like, oh, I remember Abel. And there's Abel right there, and Abel's like, oh, Daddy, I'm so happy I pleased you. So through faith, through confidence in God's provision, confidence in putting God first, Abel pleased God. And through life and through death, he still pleases God with that faith. Amen. Be blessed.